Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be covering all the mythics in solo queue. So this will be their overall placement of how valuable I think the item is, what can it do, is it niche, is it got a lot of uses, stuff like this. So if you enjoy the content, like and subscribe, and let's get into it. To begin with, the D tier, Crown of the Shattered Queen. It's a pretty bad item. It hasn't got a great stat line. The value of its overall act, or like the part which is kind of why it's built, isn't great, especially in the current meta where there's a lot of poke going on. It has a 40-second cooldown as well, makes it quite high. Overall, the item is just pretty bad. It really needs buffs to put it into a better spot, at least comparison to a couple of the other mage items. Everfrost I'm also going to put down here. I think Everfrost was a lot better when it had the 1.5 second route, but now it's only 1 second and people have like 30% tenacity on average usually. It doesn't last very long, and then you just have to also look at this as like a util item with a bit of damage on top of the root. And overall, this item also doesn't do too well. It's a lot more built than Crown of the Shattered Queen, but even then, I'd say this item's still one of the worst out of the mage items. Going into the C tier, I'm going to put Rocket Belt here. This may surprise people, but I don't think Rocket Belt is a great item. I think when you have counterparts of things like Night Harvester, there we go, that's the one. It doesn't really line up. It's actually so much worse in solo queue than Night Harvester, which I will talk about in a bit. So I definitely recommend going for Night Harvester over this item almost all the time. There are circumstances where Protobelt can be used to proc like Crown, or it can be used to create some sort of combo where you can gap close onto them and it has that value. So I'm not going to put in D tier for that reason, but for the most part, just go Night Harvester. It does more damage, it has a better stat line, just overall kind of a better item. Gold Drinker, I'm also going to put C tier. I've personally disliked Gold Drinker for a while now. I think Stridebreaker is just the better option to go for. The healing on Gold Drinker feels fairly minimal. Of course, if you have things surrounding it which benefit Gold Drinker can go up in value into like the B tier. But for the most part, I'm putting in the C tier just because I think there are significantly better options for most of the champs which can itemize into this. I'm also going to put Riftmaker down here. I think Riftmaker just in general is a pretty bad item at the moment. It's ran by very few champions. Mordekaiser, Gwen, Kayle are some of the few which can run it. Twitch is another one in the support role. But for the most part, this item, as much as it has value in certain like itemization on some champions, it's because they just straight up don't have better options. Having only 70 AP on like the base of this item isn't great, but a lot of its value does come from the legendary passive on it, which gives you some AP and some Omnivamp. So this does sort in fairly well as like a third or fourth item, but for the most part, you don't tend to want to rush it. It's not a great rush option. Heartsteel, also kind of very built on very few champions. A lot of the champions which run this item have been buffed up to a point where they can like use this item and perform well. Cho'Gath and Sion come to mind. Mundo is another user. Tom Kench can run this alongside Radiant Virtue, but most champs don't want to run this item. It's a bad tank item. If your kit has health scaling, that's where it comes in useful, or the champ just overall doesn't have a better option, like it can't really run Jack Show that effectively because it doesn't build a lot of resist, or it doesn't really use Radiant that well because it doesn't really need the ult health boost and healing. So overall, Heartsteel just isn't great at the moment. I'd like him to buff it and maybe make it a less low elo skewed option, definitely. Locket, I'm also going to put down here. Locket used to be a lot better. I think Locket actually used to be like an A S tier item, but they kept nothing with shield and the passive on it. And overall, compared to even Shroud at the moment and Radiant Virtue, I'd say Locket is just far less, is just a far inferior item. So I definitely recommend building the other two. Duskblade is my first item in the B tier. I don't think Duskblade is bad. I think it has a place in the game, definitely. But when you're building this item, you kind of lose a lot of the value which Eclipse has, where Eclipse is a really good all-round item. The Duskblade passive of the Invis is kind of what you're playing around, combined with the slow and the damage. And overall, Eclipse just comes in at a lot more, as a lot more valuable of an item. It works a lot better on Bruisers as well. So I think for the true assassin item, this and Prowlers are definitely your go-to. But I would consider Prowlers a lot better. There's more skill expression in the item, and you can do more interesting things with Prowlers. So Duskblade isn't a bad option. Definitely can work on a couple of champions, but not as good as the other options, so I'm going to put in the B tier. Shield Bow. I don't like Shield Bow that much. I think it is just significantly worse compared to the other crit options. When you can go Gale Force and you can go Kraken Slayer, one providing a lot of damage, one providing a really high value dash, Shield Bow Shield just doesn't really line up to it until later on into the game where it becomes a lot stronger. Shield Bow, once again, is an item with a lot of its strength within its legendary passive and the scaling on the item, with the shield really ramping up as you get more levels. So overall, if this had a stronger shield early, I'd definitely put it higher, but for the most part, you're only really building this item on the Wind Brothers and Samira. And Nyla, I guess, but then Nyla can do things with Gale Force and have a better success. So I'll put it here because crit items are strong at the moment, but it's definitely the weaker of the three. Iceborne I'm going to put down here as a bit of a niche option. I think Iceborne's pretty good, but as it's only got armor, it's a sheen item, it doesn't have the barmies on it, it kind of hurts it. It's definitely, like, whereas old Iceborne, I'd say, was definitely an S tier item, new Iceborne, probably B tier, but there are arguments where it can be stronger and fall into the A and even higher when you get a lot of value out of it. Malphite can use it quite well, and there are other times where the item can have value. Jerk Show, I'm going to put in B tier because it's an item you don't really want to pick up early, and you want a lot of resist to make value of this item, especially with the bonus resist on it, 20%, which you get at full stacks. But as this item, it kind of needs to come in as a third, fourth option. It really hurts it overall. So, but this was to try and force it off Bruisers, which they had to do, increasing the gold value, increasing the price of it, and changing its bonus from the base resists. No, it hurt the item, but yeah, it's not bad. It's just forced to be built later on. So I'm going to leave it in B tier. I think the other tank option, Radiant, is just far superior to like all of the other items by a decent amount. Like the other tank items. Ludens, A tier. Ludens is actually really good as a high DPS magic pen option. Has a lot of AP on it, has good pen on it as well. And overall, most burst mages want to itemize into this, so definitely high value. Consider putting in S tier, but as I'm also going to put Liandry's in A tier, because I think Liandry's, although it is a really good item and the burn is really valuable, I don't think it's S tier worthy at the moment, especially when they nerfed it. But for the most part, it's also a really solid mage item. Just mage items in general aren't the strongest, as strong as the other items of certain classes. Roa. Roa is really good. It works really well as a scaling option. The level can be really valuable. A lot of the champs in the game at the moment are really good Roa Seraphs abusers. And the item just in general got buffed to a point where it actually functions quite nicely as a mage option. I'm also not going to put this in S tier because I think you have to meet certain conditions to use this item well. And I think a lot of champions actually fall into the debate of running this item when Liandry's is better, which is why Liandry's can possibly creep up into the S tier. Definitely the lead of the A tier. I'm also going to put Even Shot here. Even Shot is another item which can possibly creep up into the S tier. It has a lot of value on the champions which can build it. Things like Ro and Alistar make use of the passive really nicely. Just the overall scenario of doing more damage towards champions who you've immobilized or being immobilized from makes it really valuable. So yeah, don't sleep on this item. 10% damage up is a lot, especially for marksmen who do a lot of damage at the moment. And overall, good stat line. Fairly cheap price. Definitely consider buying it. Moonstone is the worst of the two, worst of the three. Well, it's on par with a Mandate, because I think Mandate has really good circumstances where it can be built in. But Moonstone, not as strong as it used to be. They nerfed it down to a point where I'd say it's a relatively balanced item. A lot of the champions are better Shreddiers users, which is why I'm going to put Shreddies in the S tier. I think Shreddies is actually a really good option. Has a really good mythic passive, but yeah, Moonstone, not a bad item. Works quite nicely on like Soraka and Sona. There are other champions it works decently well on, but I'd say this is a lot more of a competitive skewed item. In solo queue, movement speed's really valuable, which is why I put Mandate, which is why I put Chevaliers in the S tier. Imperial Mandate, however, does do a lot of damage. The on-hit is really valuable. The damage on the proc is really valuable. It has a lot of good synergies with the champions which can build it. Ashe, of course, one of the recent champions which can use it really well. Nami, another champion which can use it really well. There are other champs which this item does will function on quite nicely. Things like Swain, of course, can use this item. But it's made, whereas the opposite has been done with Heartsteel, a lot of the Imperial Mandate champions have been nerfed to kind of balance out the just overall pool without nerfing the item. But yeah, Imperial Mandate is still a decently strong item, so definitely consider going it. Strikebreaker is definitely a lot better than Gore Drinker. The cripple has a lot of value on this item. It has a significantly good stat line. The Mythic passive is a bit lackluster, only 2% movement speed per legendary item you buy, but overall it's still a really good item. Definitely, definitely one of the better Bruiser options. It probably falls in as the best health Bruiser option. So I'm going to talk about Divine Cinderer and Triforce together. I think Triforce is heavily slept on as an item. Has really high value when your champ builds a lot of is a good sieger and has a lot of base AD. Things like Darius, Alawi, Jax can use this item quite well. Of course, Jax usually goes to Divine Cinderer, but Triforce is probably a better option on him in a lot of games. It's definitely underbuilt. I wouldn't sleep on it. Divine Cinderer Rope is a good item. It has a lot of good uses where it can burn through tanks quite nicely. The heal on it's quite good. The pen on it's quite good. The stat line's quite good. It's just an all-round good item. So definitely not. I'd say these items are fairly equal. But if Triforce was built more, I think Triforce is a bit superior to Divine Cinderer. Going into the S tier, Kraken Slayer and Gale Force. Both these crit options are really good. Most ADCs run these two as core. Definitely, well, as I talked about, the dash is really valuable. The overall damage which Kraken can output is also really valuable. Prowler's Claw, incredibly powerful item. This item can provide certain champions with ways to play the game. For example, Argot would suck ass if he couldn't build Prowler's Claw. I think Prowler's Claw makes his champ viable, and it makes a lot of other champions feel a lot better. Things like Riven feel a lot better when you go Prowler's Claw or Eclipse, which is why I'm also putting Eclipse here. So, yeah, these two lethality items are better on most bruisers than the actual bruiser items, but most people haven't caught on to this, so definitely pay attention to whether your champ can actually utilize either of these two items well, because you'll find out most of them do use these items better. Shorty I'd consider the best support item at the moment for the enchanter class and overall range class. Most of them can use this item quite well. It has a lot of value in the movement speed. The legendary passive is quite nice on it. The overall stat line is quite good. So overall, just works as a really good all-round item. If you're more controlled of a fight, then Moonstone has a lot of value. But for the moment, Shirley is probably the stronger of the two. So definitely consider going it. Radiant, still really, really powerful at the moment. Probably overall the highest win rate mythic in the game. Just best in slot on most tanks, best in slot on most engage supports as well. Even after it kind of got tuned away from being their best item, it still kind of is their best item. Things like Fresh, Rel, Alistar can all abuse this item really well. So definitely don't sleep on this. It's probably their best in slot. So in most situations, it's going to be their best in slot. And Night Harvester. Night Harvester, of course, a really, really good solo queue item. Probably one of the best in the game. It's very tailored towards solo queue. You can run this alongside like Dark Harvest and go for a lot of procs, a lot of DPS. And overall, just has a lot of value. The legendary passives are really nice on it. The overall damage is nice. The movement speed is really valuable. The stat line's really good. And most champs can abuse it well. Sidus jungle, Gragas is another good one. There's just overall a lot of champs which can actually just use this item as their best mythic, but a lot of people options for mana, when realistically, if they're using their spells more optimally, but Night Harvester has a lot of value. It's also really good in the jungle. Things like Eve, trying to think of others off the top of my head. Elise can also use this item really well. So yeah, definitely really strong. Definitely a solo queue tailored item. So those are my overall thoughts. I'll be happy to hear what your kind of like thoughts are. Overall, this is probably going to be what majority agree on, because yeah, there's just certain items which stand out above a lot of the others at the moment, and a lot of the lower tier items are, some of them aren't bad, but a lot of them are just kind of niche in circumstances, or some of them are just outright bad, where the champs have had to be buffed up to a point where the item is kind of strong because they're so strong. So yeah, if you ever cut on, like, subscribe, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. I can't find the